performance. Okay, taboo subjects. What don't we talk about in church? Well, several things. But one thing that we don't talk about in church or Sunday school or most anywhere else except a memorial service is death. Oh my gosh. Human beings are the only ones in the animal kingdom that know that they're going to die. Now, animals have survival instinct, but they don't know that their lifespan is so many years and they're going to die. We're the only ones who know that. And so, in order to live without the specter of death before humanity all the time, humanity created religion. Religion as a buffer to give humanity another focus so they were not constantly living in this angst of knowing that their death is eventually coming. Well, so there was a God created that decided where we will go after death, and there was a criteria created so that if you followed certain rules that maybe you'd go to heaven, but probably not. And man created a God of divine reward and divine retribution and put it all off until after physical death. Well, in Unity we speak of heaven and hell as states of mind. And we call death a transition into the next expression in living. And we don't need those false buffers anymore because we have spiritual truth. But the question still is, what happens when the body dies? What happens to our consciousness? Are we going somewhere? Will we meet our loved ones when we get there? And probably if you meet your loved ones, there are probably going to be some there that you'd rather not meet. Or is it true what Shakespeare writes, that we have our entrances and our exits, all signifying nothing? Well, you know, when ministers are ordained, it is assumed that we are given the book of life and that we now have the answers to those things. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know any more than you do because none of us have died yet. So when they ask us what's going to happen after death, we're guessing the same as everybody else. And of course there are some ministers who believe they do know the answers, and they point to someone and say that you are going to hell, as if they take on that role of God. So what do I think about slipping off into that great beyond? What are the choices? Well, you know, the first choice is maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's nothing. You know, if you've ever been under general anesthetic, I know when I was, there was nothing, and when they tried to wake me up, I gave them a fight. I thought, oh no, there's pain out there, I'm not coming back, you know, and I really wanted them to just shut up and leave me alone. I was not unhappy. I was not anywhere or anything, and it was okay. All right. And in the early Jewish cultures, they called it sleeping with the fathers or simply going to sleep, and then there was nothing except for Samuel. And King Saul, in his usual stumbling, wanted to know what was going to happen, and so he found the prophetess of Endor. And he went to her. She was a seer, and he wanted her to conjure up Samuel so that Saul could ask Samuel a question. And so she did that, and up comes Samuel. And Samuel said, "Who's waking me up? Who's disturbing my sleep?" And he was just totally upset and angry. And so that was an interesting little story about what might be there. We don't know. And so nothingness sort of makes me wonder, what's the point of consciousness? And so another choice is to move on in spirit and to create another life, another dimension of consciousness. And in my book, The Divine Design, I've written a whole chapter about co-creating ideas instead of procreating bodies. You know, what are we going to be like if we're in our next dimension? What are we going to choose for that? Well, how about co-creating ideas with each other? How about mind melding as a form of communication instead of talking? Thank you, Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek. Merging thinking patterns instead of talking. There was one quote from Ernest Holmes from Science of Mind, and he said, one day we will all think in patterns. And that was about 1970 when I saw that, and that's fascinated me ever since. How shall we be governed? Oh, fun. By the divine responsibility within each of us that needs no outer intervention. Oh boy. There goes the political system. Poof, thank you, God. All right. And we will create ourselves over and over in the image and likeness of God. Now, this is a creation of my mind, and so there couldn't be nothing. And Jesus is quoted as saying, I go to prepare a place for you, and when you are ready, you will know the way. Of course, his disciples said, well, where are you going? We don't know the way. And he said, you're not ready yet, but you will know the way. Oh. And then he went on to say, if this were not true, I wouldn't have said it. I wouldn't lie to you. So these are the clues that we have. First Samuel being raised up by the prophets of Endor to answer Saul's questions. And now Jesus saying, I go to prepare a place for you. So, what about this? I had a friend years ago, and she had every form of arthritis. And she was from Christian Science, and I had just started in Science of Mind. And so we talked about this, and she said, when one of us goes, we'll contact the other. I said, okay. Well, when Ruth died, I was listening really hard to be there if she contacted me. And of course, a year went by and nothing happened, and I sort of forgot about it. And one Christmas I was singing with a chorus that was doing the Messiah in this huge congregational church. And you know, if you've ever sung in the Messiah, you just get higher and higher and higher until you just want to explode out the top. And so after this was over, I went down the 3 stories to where our coats were at the bottom level. And as I got down there, I looked over at my coat, and there she stood, crutches and all. And I just stopped for a moment. She was just smiling at me. And then I just kind of shook my head, and she was gone. Oh. And then, before I came into ministry, there was a man I was working with, Lester McLeod. And Lester had cancer, and I didn't really know anything about ministry, but I was in personnel at the time, and so I went to visit Les, and I started to talk to him about, this is the easiest thing you'll ever do. And so you reach for the light, and I'm describing this to him, and another part of my brain is saying, what the heck do you think you know about it? You haven't died yet, so, but I'm still talking about this to him, and he got so fascinated, he was asking me questions about it. And so I continued talking to him about this, literally off the top of my head. And when Les died, he was so emaciated that the light from the window shone right through his body. And yet his mind was brilliant. His mind was clear. And I had seen him the night before he died, and we talked some more about this. And the next morning, his wife came in. I wasn't there. And he died when she was there. And she said, well, I thought, well, this is all there is. And she went to walk out the door of his hospital room, and she turned around to look at him. And she said he had the most beautiful smile on his face. He was just full of light. And she said, don't tell me this was chemistry, and don't tell me, this was a function of the body. This was spirit, this was light. I said, okay, all right. And so when I got into ministry, I was in Columbia, Missouri, and I became an on-call chaplain. And that was so that I would on-call on weekends so that the regular chaplains could have the weekend off. And I got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the hospital said, we have a man who's dying and they want a chaplain. Okay. And I'm trying to clear the fog, looking in my closet and saying, what does a minister wear at 3 o'clock in the morning to the hospital? And so I'm trying to figure out something to put on and get there. And when I got there, the room had about 10 people in it. And there were 2 young men in white coats. And, you know, in my silliness, I thought they were the orderlies and they were the doctors. But I went on by them. And I did something I'd never done before. I went in and I sat down on this man's bed. And I looked into his face. I said, what do you want me to do for you? And he said, I want you to pray with me as I go across the line. I said, okay, now I want you to know this is the easiest, most comfortable thing you've ever done in your life. And here I go again. You're going to feel perfectly safe. You're going to reach for light. I did that. Just kept talking to him. And finally, his daughter said, I think it's time to pray. He's going. So we made a circle around his bed and we prayed. And after he was gone, I talked to the family a little bit and then I left. Now, I didn't have a pin on it, didn't have my name or anything on it. They wouldn't have known who I was from Adam's House Cat. And 2 weeks later on Sunday morning, the phone rang. And I never answered the phone on Sunday mornings because people were wanting to have directions to the church. And that was already on the answering machine, so I never picked up the phone. And for some reason, I picked up that phone. It was this man's daughter. And she said, you may not remember me, but you were there when my father died 2 weeks ago. I said, yes, I remember. And she said, he said to me, tell her that I see the flowers and they're beautiful. I said, oh my gosh. And so I keep getting these messages. And I was called to the home of a young man who was dying of AIDS. And when I got there, his partner said, he can only talk for about 5 minutes, he's so weak. Well, by that time, I had learned running energy, they call it energy healing, but we aren't really healers. We share our energy with someone, and their body begins to fill up and stop struggling and start healing. So it's kind of how that process happens. But I went into his room, and he had just a sheet over him, and his bare feet were sticking out. And I went over to the foot of his bed, and I put my hands on the bottoms of his feet and just started to run the energy. And he and I talked for an hour. And I got to talk to him about his life, about death, and all these sort of things. We had a marvelous conversation. And the next day he died. So we were given an opportunity to share this one more time. And I'm still thinking, what do I think I know about this? You know, where is this coming from? And I was invited to do a graveside service. There was a young man who had died of AIDS. I went to see him in the hospital. The most beautiful young man laying there, probably 22 years old, brain dead. And, you know, he looked for all the world like he could just sit up and talk to us. But his brain was no longer functioning, just his body. And I know this was something I hadn't really seen before, and I was, you know, where did he go? Where did he go? Where is he? And his mother and father were divorced. His father was very angry and came storming into the room, and he said, I'm going to plan his funeral service, and it's going to be my minister. And the mother said, well, this is my minister, Reverend Carol Lundy, and she's going to do the graveside. And so I thought, oh, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but his father stormed out. And so I got to the funeral that day, and there were 60 people sitting there. The place was packed in this funeral home. And I was at the back. And this minister was up front telling these people that this young man had gone to hell. that he was a sinner, that he had gone to hell, and gave one of those old fundamentalist talks, just beating everybody down. And I'm standing in the back thinking, okay, God, what do you want me to do here? You know, I'm in the back. All these people are in front of me. This guy is tearing everybody to pieces. And I just stood there, and the funeral director came up front at the end of the service, and he said, will you please follow Reverend Carol Lundy to the gravesite? And a young man in the middle of that group stood up and he says, wait a minute. He said, I have to tell you, he was my best friend, and he came to me in a dream last night, and he said, tell them I'm okay. Phew. Okay. I mean, it just lifted everybody. He was okay. And so when I went out to lead the people to the gravesite, I grabbed this young man's hand, and I said, thank you so much for having the courage to say that. Thank you so much for lifting everybody up. And so when we got out to the gravesite, this minister stood there right in front of me. And I thought, okay, buddy, you've asked for it. Here comes the whole 9 yards. And so I said, you know, your friend, your son, is not in this grave and in these ashes, that he's gone on. And so we're putting ashes in the ground, but it's not him. And then I started on a whole unity spiel. And the people were in tears. They came up and thanked me for telling them the truth. This minister kind of looked at me and kind of gave me this kind of limp handshake and walked off. And I thought, minister, you were here for a reason. You are here to learn the truth, and hopefully something I said is going to go with you, and you will not do this to people ever again. So when I went out to California, I had a friend out there, and he came to ministerial school, and he had cerebral palsy. And you know what cerebral palsy looks like. You know, it distorts the body and so forth, makes it hard for him to speak and so forth. But Rolf managed to get through ministerial school. He and I had traveled with a group to Israel and to Egypt and so forth. And we had some wild experiences because, you know, how they walk. And when Rolf would walk down the beach toward the water, the police would come running after him because they thought he was a drunk and he was going to fall in and drown. So we had a lot of wonderful experiences together. We were in the museum in Cairo, and finally he had to sit down in a wheelchair because he was really kind of fading. And so I was pushing this wheelchair, and they had to, and this man came along, this Egyptian man, grabbed the wheelchair away from me and went dashing toward the elevator with it. And I kept saying, I'll take him, you know, so forth. And finally got on the elevator, got to the first floor, and I thought, oh. So I took $1 bill out of my wallet and stuffed it in his hand, and when he reached for that, I grabbed the wheelchair. And I said, you got to remember, Ralph, I bought you back. So we just had great fun. And when I had to leave California, I was just done in that church. And I'd been there 9 years, and I needed to move on. And I said to Rolf, why don't you come back with me to Missouri? And he said, Carol, with this kind of condition, we only live 50 years, and I've lived 58. And he said, you go back to Missouri. I have to pray about this. I said, okay. So I came back to Missouri and moved into my apartment at the villa. And the first night, somewhere in the middle of the night, he was standing at the foot of my bed, and he said, you can't come with me right now. And I sat up, and he was gone. I thought, what do you mean I can't come with you? I was asking you to come with me. What are you talking about? You know? But he stood there. He did not have cerebral palsy. And I got to see him in all of the beauty that he really was. I thought, oh my gosh, I may be the only one in the world that got to see him like that. So, where was he? Where did he go? Was it a dream? It was really not a dream. It's kind of what they call lucid dreaming, where it wasn't coming out of my head. There was something else happening. I thought, where is he? Where is he going? And then I thought of Jesus saying, I go to prepare a place for you, and Rolf said, you can't come with me now. And so those experiences just really kept telling me that what was coming through me, we affirmed wisdom comes from God. And these things kept coming through me. And I kept saying to myself, what makes you think you know anything about this, Carol? And yet, Spirit was telling me I did know something. I went to visit a woman who had been just a marvelous person in churches and Course in Miracles, one of these incredible beings. She just did a gazillion things during her life, and she was 102. And so I went to see her and sat there with her daughter. And Fran was deaf as a post, so she couldn't really communicate with us, hear what we were saying. But what Fran was doing was she was repeating her favorite passages from A Course in Miracles. And she had them numbered. And she'd lay there and she'd say, number 1, if miracles are not happening, something has gone wrong. And she would go through these passages and go through them. Maybe there were 80 or 90 of them. She would lay there going through these passages just from her memory. And then when she could no longer say the words, she was just getting kind of far away, she would say 1, 2, and she was doing it in her mind. And I said, that's something I'd like to do. I kind of like to go that way. And so I started to memorize things that I wanted to have on my mind as I get close to that line. And so you've heard some of them from Greg. The prayer, the ancient prayer about serene light that shines in the ground of my being. You draw me to yourself. You draw me past the snares of the senses. You lift me out of the mazes of the mind. And I am free. Free of words, free of symbols. And I discern that which is signified. But that's one I want to take with me. So I started memorizing these things. And every day I go over these. We should be able to speak the 23rd Psalm. Everybody knows that. And yet when you sit down to speak it, it's like, okay, now does the grass come before the still waters? Or, and so I started, and if I sing it, I know the words because I used to sing it as a solo. But I would start memorizing those words so I could speak them. And one that fascinated me is Elizabeth Barrett Browning's How Do I Love Thee? How do I love thee? Let me count the ways I love thee to the depth, breadth, and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for ends of being an ideal grace. Reaching out of sight for ends of being an ideal grace. And that's what I kept doing and talking to these people who were dying, and they were talking to me. We kept reaching out of sight for those ends of being an ideal grace. So being a hospice chaplain gave me so many incredible experiences and insights. These people told me things. They told me wonderful things that I started to take into myself and take with me. And that's why I wrote that chapter in my book, The Divine Design. Okay, how do we create the next expression in living? Well, now we're going to, instead of procreating bodies, we're going to co-create ideas. And this comes from Barbara Marx Hubbard. It's not mine originally, because Barbara Marx Hubbard is a futurist, and she speaks of these things as well. So, what do you want your next experience to be? If some people want nothing, and I'm sure you can have what you want. Some people want nothing. Some people in the Hindu or Buddhist, Hindus say, well, we're coming back into a higher caste level, and Buddhists say, well, we're just exploding into the great mind. There are a lot of things people have. We've created religions so that we don't have to think about this stuff, but religion has fallen a little short on us. Going to heaven and hell, excuse me. We create such fabulous heaven and hell here. Why would God bother? We're really good at it, especially the hell part. And so I've often thought, you know what? I think Fran, as she was going across that line and reciting her Course in Miracles passages, that she was starting to create the next expression in living that she wanted. I thought, we can do that. We can do that. And, Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. He didn't say, I set up the house with all the furniture and everything, and you're going to have the same things you have here. No, that place is that place in consciousness. He said, in my Father's house are many mansions, many, many dimensions in living. This is just one. This is just, and then probably this is the lowest and slowest vibration in creation because it's the physical one. And, when we came into this physical life, maybe we weren't quite sure how hard it was going to be. And here we come in as babies, and the next thing we do, our fist hits us in the eye, and we don't know why, and trying to get control of this body and so forth. And we have to grow through all of this infancy and childhood. So maybe there was a reason for that we don't need to keep doing that over and over. We start recreating ourselves in the image and likeness of God. The Apostle Paul said, I reach forward to the upward call for the prize in Christ Jesus. He kept saying, kept trying to move up into that consciousness. And Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, we're no longer pushed by our biology, but we are drawn by the Omega. And so we're no longer pushed by our biology. Suddenly we take this curve upward, where we are drawn upward by the Omega, by God, by that next expression. So there's so much that we have access to, so much to think about, and so much to understand about. We learn to focus our minds on health and prosperity and all the things we need in the physical world. Now we can start focusing our minds on what we'd like to create in our next expression. Bishop John Shelby Spong, in his book, Eternal Life, A New Vision, arrived at the understanding that it is the ever-expanding human consciousness in which eternity lives, that we are eternally expanding in consciousness and creating the eternal. And he said, consciousness keeps expanding and expanding like the universe expands and expands until there is no thing, until it's all spirit and there is no thing. Dr. Brian Swim said that we are the eyes of the universe, awake, looking back upon the entire universe itself and seeing it all. We are the universe seeing itself for the very first time. And we continue to expand. So we've got many wonderful things to think about. Were we put here in this life to love and then be heartbroken? Don't think so. Don't think so. I know Les's wife, when she saw that gorgeous smile on his face, she said, it took me at least 2 weeks to feel sad that he was gone because I was so filled with that. Do I believe there's something more? Definitely. Do I know what it is? I only know so far and what I've experienced and how I can explain what I've experienced. But there is a vast sense of the beyond that I can't put into words. It is the no thing into which we are evolving. Call it God, call it spirit, call it love. We are the universe awake, and the universe never sleeps. We can dream of what we might be. But for right now, Bishop John Shelby Spong's favorite advice is, live fully, love wastefully, every day. And that's what we don't talk about in church.